Hi everyone, my name is Odisho. Welcome back to my book club where I talk about books. And today we're going to be talking about the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. This is an ancient Chinese philosophical text. It's really quite thin, but it's one of those books that you never start or finish. It just it's separated into 80 or so chapters, but as you can see, each chapter is only like a paragraph poem size. It's been translated dozens of times into English from the Chinese. It's one of those very famous texts, and there's a whole school of thought, Taoism. I'm not an expert if it exactly, I don't necessarily think it's like religion, but it almost talks about, it has some sort of mystical aspect to it as well. But in its most functional form, a lot of things that this book talks about, I think a reason why it's popular, it just gives some pretty simple philosophical thoughts about how to conduct your life and kind of the benefit of action versus inaction. I'd like to read some of my favorite, most memorable passages. This isn't a type of book where you read it and it finishes. Like I said, it's just a bunch of paragraphs of wisdom and philosophical takes that you can read over and over and over, and they can apply to many different things. I've made a video about how this relates to video editing, the concept of negative space, and you can apply this to any sort of action or life. But one of my favorite parts is in chapter 15. I guess it depends on the translation you have. Murky as a troubled stream, which of you can assume such murkiness to become in the end still and clear? Which of you can make yourselves inert to become in the end full of life and stir? And then it goes on to say, those who possess this Tao do not try to fill themselves to the brim, and because they do not try to fill themselves to the brim, they are like a garment that endures all wear and needs never to be renewed. So the first section of that, I guess I've seen some translations where murkiness is called muddiness, and basically the idea that in troubled times or troubled muddy waters, you could say as a metaphor, a lot of times the best thing to do, or how do you make muddy water still, is to just let it sit. Shaking it up, doing a bunch of more action, stirring it up is only going to make it more muddy. I suppose if you want to get technical, you could like sift it or do something to it, but being able to sit still will let the mud clear, let the water clear and separate. And that's kind of the metaphor that runs throughout this whole book. The results that come from inaction rather than action. Taking a look at what things are instead of what they aren't. The second part of that about knowing when to stop. Like, you can't lose anything if you don't have anything. It's this kind of constant reaction or opposite effect that it discusses. Here's another chapter 36. What is in the end to be shrunk must first be stretched. Whatever is to be weakened must begin by being made strong. What is to be overthrown must begin by being set up. Something is what it is because of what it's not. If you're not a hoarder, you don't have to worry about losing things. One thing that I think runs parallel throughout this whole thing is kind of this idea or assertion that there's some sort of guiding force. I'll call it gravity in my mind. This is how I like to think about. Like, we don't always have to do something. We don't always have to produce an action, because sometimes we can just let gravity do its thing or let time do its thing and be patient. Going back to the water example, we don't always have to try to clear the water if we can just let it sit still and let the universe or whatever do its thing and settle things out. This also, I've read in another book about why procrastination is actually good, because it lets us let certain things take care of themselves. In a really mundane example, I get a ton of emails on my channel about how to do a video editing problem, and sometimes I just don't respond right away just because I happen to be busy, but I'll go back to it the next day, or I'll get a follow-up email later that same day saying, hey, sorry, I figured it out already. So how much of stuff just kind of resolves itself by doing nothing, and how much harm do we do ourselves by constantly trying to do something? There's another really good chapter in here. Well, there's a lot of good chapters, honestly. It's one of those things that you can just read over and over again. You can read all of them in one sitting, but you can continue to gain from them throughout your life. The first time I read it, I just couldn't pick up a lot of things. It seemed like that typical type of mystical saying a lot but not saying anything. But really, I think it's saying a lot by saying not much. And so in keeping with the principles of this book, I think I'll know when to stop this video. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of my other book reviews and discussions in the book playlist on my channel. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JustinOdisho if you guys want to get in touch with me or talk to me about books or this book. Thanks so much for watching. See you guys in the next one.